All right, hello. My name is Zachary Cahill. My research topic is the effects of publicly displayed forms of discipline on elementary school children's mental health, self identity, self worth, basically the relation between those. Now, if you haven't seen any of my previous either videos or anything regarding my research topic in the classroom files, in case you aren't aware, so my project, what I mean when I say publicly displayed forms of discipline, are when you have something publicly displayed, like on the wall or on a board or something like that, that indicates how a child is doing or how a classroom usually is doing in terms of disciplinary action. So it's different for everybody. It's different for different ages and different ages, both within the elementary school setting, like from kindergarten up to fifth grade, sixth grade sometimes, as well as what I had in childhood is different than what most kids have nowadays, as well as what most people a generation above me had when they were in elementary school. But to give an idea, when I was in school, the things that I saw most commonly were things like I had a card system. Usually, there was like you come into the school in the beginning of the day, and you have a green card. Everybody in the class has a green card. If they misbehave or do something wrong, it switches to yellow. If they misbehave or do something wrong again, then that would then switch to red, meaning that you were in trouble for that day. That's the one that I had most commonly. I see a lot of like rainy cloud, sunny day, that kind of thing. So everybody starts off the day with a sunny, happy day, and if they do bad, it becomes a cloudy day, and then it becomes like a rainy day or a stormy day if they had a bad day or did something wrong. Now, the key here is that all of these are publicly displayed. So this isn't like something that you would put in a folder where only that child has. It's something that is put up on the wall, publicly displayed for the entire classroom to see. A lot of times, this will be done either with names or with numbers. The children are usually assigned numbers. Um, and before I go too far into that, let me just touch on that real quickly. When there are numbers assigned, oftentimes it's kind of brushed aside in terms to like a publicly displayed form of discipline because even though it is publicly displayed, a lot of people will say, "Oh, but the names aren't there. It's not attached to any particular student." Although that's completely false. To be blunt, if you're in an elementary school setting and you're with the same, let's say, you know, 20 or so kids every day, you memorize those 20 numbers. You know who's what number. When someone misbehaves, it's not like the teacher sneaks out and changes the publicly displayed form of discipline. Like, no, that chart, that behavior chart, whatever it is it may be, is changed immediately when that child does wrong. Everybody knows, everybody sees what uh, that the punishment, the publicly displayed punishment for that child. So, anyway, my topic is on that behavior chart style, that what's called shame theory, when they use shame theory or the idea of shaming a child in hopes that it corrects their behavior, and whether or not, first of all, whether or not that's even effective, but also how that affects the student in a number of ways. To give you an example, my three questions, and I have them written down here, that I've been kind of dabbling with regarding the research questions. One is, does having a public displayed form of discipline negatively affect the mental health of children in elementary school classroom? Simply put, it does having something like that on the wall make kids feel bad at a very base level. That's basically what that question is asking, and that effect could be blatantly negative. Sometimes it's not. Um, but like for example, if you know a child is always near the top or almost near the top, and there's like a weird power struggle, something like that could arise. But I won't go into that in too much detail here. In addition to that, my next question, or the next question that I would touch on, is what is the effectiveness of publicly displayed behavior charts for students in elementary school? So that is basically, how well do they work? Do they work for every student? Do they actually correct behavior? Does it cause any kind of positive benefits? And in addition to the positive benefits, or assuming there are some, what are the negative benefits? So, kind of the idea of what is their overall success level regarding different kids and how they do. The third is, how does a child's view, elementary school child's view of their self worth, relate to the public display of behavior charts in elementary school system? So the way that's different than the first question, the first one being, does it negatively affect a child at all? Like, does having a publicly displayed form of discipline cause any kind of power struggle, any kind of damaging to the mental health or the self worth of the child in that classroom? The third question is rather, okay, assuming it does, or even if it's outside of the behavior chart, assuming a child does have a damaged sense of self worth, um, or he or she has problems with mental health issues. It could be a variety of things, but does that affect the behavior of them in the classroom? Oftentimes, that will also go back and affect the second question of the effectiveness of the behavior chart. Um, there's a lot of different ways this can come about. The one that my theory at least, is that When you have a publicly displayed form of discipline, like a chart or something like that on the wall, oftentimes there will be a student or a few students, probably a few, who are constantly getting in trouble, who are constantly having uh, their number changed, their card changed, their peg lowered on the board in some way or another for the school, for the whole classroom to see. And when that happens, it sort of naturally creates um, this like ostracization of that student. So that child who is constantly, every day, constantly having that thing changed, not only is obviously not working if it's happening every day. But in addition to that, that child now starts to see themselves, or like they see themselves every day as being the troublemaker. They see themselves as the problem child. Not only that, but the classroom, because it's publicly displayed, recognizes on a public daily level, like it's almost like an announcement, like, okay, everybody. Child A has gotten in trouble again. Let's lower that on the board so everybody can see it. When this happens so regularly, like I said, there's that natural separation of the classroom. The social norms become kind of divided because that child is now seen as separate in one way or another, as either, like I said, a problem child, a class clown, whatever it may be. And those repeat offenders, I would imagine, do undergo some form of negative mental health or a negative view of self-worth or self-identity, how it changes the way they see themselves as a student in the educational system, because when they are constantly being put on display for the entire classroom, it does create this sort of negative separation of how they interact with not only their other students, but how they interact with their teachers, how they interact with faculty, how they see themselves, as a member of this educational society, of the classroom society. So that's an overall summary. Sorry if I went into a little too much detail, but going into the research of this and what I've found to date, first and foremost, before I really started looking into this myself, I was shocked at how very little research there is on this topic. Now, there's tons of research on discipline. There's tons of research on um, modern day alternative disciplines, things like PBIS, or something that's more communal and more um, rehabilitatory, or rehabilitations is the key there, and they care about actually improving the um, child's behavior in the long run, making them a better student. However, there's very little talking about how discipline interacts with children when it is publicly displayed, specifically. I've looked across everything, and it's really hard to find. There are a few, unfortunately, now very out of date articles that touch on this regarding things like dunce caps, like putting them off in a corner for timeout and putting a dunce cap on, something like that. Because in all reality, that's no different than what we see nowadays. When you say you're doing bad and you put a frowny face on their board, and the whole class sees that, it's the same thing as saying you're doing bad. You put a dunce cap on that child's head, and the whole class sees that. It's so hard to see the similarities between those. In modern day society, in modern day classrooms, but it really is the same logic. Um, and I'm really having a hard time finding any research. The more I look, the more I realize there really, as far as I'm aware, there really haven't been any long-term effects that have been looked into regarding analytical numbers, actual um, quantitative research regarding this kind of, okay, it's publicly displayed, how does that affect the student, how does it affect their social norms, how does it affect their mental health. There really isn't any of that. So that was my first big shock when I looked into this, was how little there was. And unfortunately, after having much time and now having looked into it in much more depth, I've only confirmed that there is really nothing on this topic. At least nothing directly on this topic, although there are a lot of things that skirt around it, which of course I'll be using for my own resources here. Um, Now, another thing that I felt was really interesting in regards to my interviews and the people I spoke with, and I apologize, I'm drinking coffee if you're watching this. Um, but anyway, something I thought was very unusual was, or very surprising, was that whoever I spoke with, whether that be elementary school teachers, whether that be administration, whether that be people within the mental health field, it shocked me that this isn't, as far as I'm aware, it doesn't seem to be a very argued idea. When I brought this up, almost as I was talking to them and as I was explaining, well, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm trying to do my research on, but constantly I'm getting head nods, and people, once I actually start speaking with them, are very much like, "Oh yeah, absolutely. I see that all the time. I see that in my classrooms. I saw that in my past classrooms." Like, um, it's shocking that this is not, just as far as I'm aware, it doesn't seem to be something that people don't know about, or it doesn't seem that people um, disagree with what I'm trying to prove here. It seems like everybody I've spoken with seem to validate or validate the things that I'm trying to bring up here and the things I'm trying to look into. In addition to that, um, I see I'm going a little long here. I want to make sure it's not too long. I want to make sure hang in there with me. I'll finish up here. Um, in addition to that, I thought it was interesting that a few, not only teachers but people I've spoken with, have also brought up how oftentimes it's almost seen as a alternative, or as an alternative to a behavior chart, when there's some sort of positive reward system. So same exact thing, right? You have a board, something publicly displayed, and you do good, or you improve on your test, or whatever it may be. Well, then the teacher would then say, "Hey, student did good. Let me give you a you did good," or "Oh, let's get the tests back, and the students who did good on their tests or who are showing improvement, those students will go up on the board." And what I'm finding is multiple teachers have, or people in the field have mentioned to me, like, "Oh, and don't count that out, because in a lot of ways it does the same thing that you're describing now, where that child who's not improving, even though they're not being ostracized in the same way, in that it's not like, oh, everybody look at this student who did something wrong, it essentially creates that same dichotomy of how the student sees himself in relation to other people, because there is still that, basically, that repeat offender. There's that child, or there are children who are not improving at the same rate as everybody else, and it gives them that same worry, that same um, same sense of self-worth that they have to either grapple with, or mental health issues that could potentially lead from there, um, and along those lines. So the last thing I'll touch on real quick is just the mental health in general. um, of course, mental health is going to affect your grades. Mental health is going to affect everything about you as a student. And I've found that, obviously, the healthier, the more comfortable you are in that environment, and the more, essentially, uh, I don't want to use this term, but basically, the more mental health you have, the better your mental health is. I mean, generally speaking, the more successful you'll be in terms of fitting in that environment, in terms of rolling smoothly with behavior, with discipline, and things like that. What I've seen is, and there's a huge variety, so I don't want to like say one or two specific things, but a general swath, things like depression, things like negative self-worth, self-loathing. Those are probably the main ones that you're going to see in regards to something like my project. You will most definitely see an effect in terms of their discipline. It almost directly correlates. Basically, the worse, or the more mental health issues you have, the more issues regarding your self-worth, things like that, directly relate to the more problems you'll find yourself in an elementary school setting. That's the student that's going to be going to the counselor repeatedly, etc. So anyway, that's an overarching view of my research so far. It all seems to be correlating. I'm happy to see that it all, as far as I'm aware, seems to be backing up my original theory. I haven't had to do any like adjusting or changing to make things work or anything like that. It seems pretty straightforward as far as I can tell. So thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, and you have a good day.